Imagine, for just a moment, that it's the dead of winter in the late 17th century.
Oh, wow. Okay. Setting the scene.
Yeah, so you're sitting in the Bedford County Jail in England, and the walls are this porous stone, just literally weeping with dampness.
Which is miserable. I mean, there's no heating at all.
None. And the sanitation is, practically non-existent. You've been locked in this freezing cell for...
Over a decade. Over a decade. Just let that sink in.
Right. And the crazy part is, the only reason you're in this cell is that you just refuse to stop preaching outside the state-sanctioned church.
Yeah, that was the crime.
And you have a wife and you have children on the outside, including a blind daughter whose survival you just agonize over every single day.
Oh, man. Psychological toll of that.
Exactly. The sheer crushing weight of that physical and emotional reality, I mean, it should reduce a human mind to ash.
It absolutely should break you. And honestly, it was designed to break you.
Right. The system wanted to break.
Yeah, because the English Restoration period was, it was not a tolerant era at all.
No, it was a massive cultural whiplash.
Right. So following the strict Puritan years under Oliver Cromwell, the monarchy gets restored under Charles II. And society just swings wildly.
Like a total pendulum swing. You had all this widespread cultural debauchery on the streets of London.
Exactly. But legally, the state clamped down so hard on religious nonconformists.
Yeah, they really didn't mess around.
No. I mean, the Clarendon Code and the Conventicle Act essentially made it a strict crime to hold any unauthorized religious gatherings.
Which is how John Bunyan, who was just this poor tinker but had this brilliant mind, ended up rotting away in a cell.
Right.
And here is the thing that brings us to the deep dive today. While sitting in that freezing cell, stripped of literally every earthly comfort...
He wasn't writing letters of despair.
No. He was mapping out this cosmic, multidimensional architecture of divine grace.
It's just staggering.
It really is. So for you, the listener, the mission for our deep dive today is to unpack a treatise he wrote. It was published posthumously in 1692.
Right, called The Saint's Knowledge of Christ's Love.
It's exactly.
Which, I mean, is arguably one of the most intense, psychologically astute pieces of literature to ever emerge from the Puritan era.
It really is. But the core of this treatise, it revolves around a riddle.
A very specific riddle.
Yeah, and this is where I want to bring you, the listener, into the fold. Because usually when we talk about a diagnosis, whether it's medical or psychological, we crave precision.
We want exact answers.
Right. If you break your arm, the x-ray shows a jagged white line. The doctor points to it, and the diagnosis is clean. It's binary.
It's visible. You can see it.
But when you step into the world of human psychology or spiritual depression, navigating the sheer weight of your own existence on like a random Tuesday.
That x-ray machine completely shattered.
The landscape is just murky, and Bunyan is writing a survival manual for that exact murkiness.
And his starting point is what we call an epistemological paradox.
Okay, let's unpack this, because an epistemological paradox sounds incredibly academic.
It sounds like a college seminar. Yeah, so for those of us who didn't major in philosophy, epistemology is just the study of how we know things.
How we acquire knowledge.
Right, and we live in an era that is totally obsessed with data. If you can't measure it or quantify it or put it in a spreadsheet, it isn't real.
Exactly. But Bunyan centers this entire survival manual on a command from the Apostle Paul.
Yes, from the letter to the Ephesians.
Right. A command to, quote-unquote, know a love that the text explicitly says passes knowledge.
Right. He's telling the Ephesians to comprehend the incomprehensible, to measure the unmeasurable.
It's totally wild. And the author wasn't just playing semantic word games to sound deep.
No, he really wasn't.
He was identifying a literal limit in human cognition and honestly weaponizing it to save people's sanity.
Weaponizing the incomprehensible. I love that. But before we break down exactly how he does that, we really have to talk about the manuscript itself.
Oh, the textual mystery. Yes.
Because the text of this treatise was the victim of a massive historical crime.
The sheer scale of the erasure is just staggering.
It's unbelievable.
I mean, when Bunyan wrote this, he was demonstrating this profound, almost photographic immersion in the scriptures.
Right.
The original manuscript contained nearly 440 distinct biblical references.
440?
Yeah. It was a rigorous verse-by-verse exegetical argument. But historical editions that were published after 1737 inexplicably stripped those references out.
They just deleted them. Why on earth would editors take a meticulously researched theological text and just delete the bibliography.
Well, you have to look at the theological tastes of the 18th century.
Right, the Enlightenment.
Yeah, exactly. The Enlightenment was taking hold, and the cultural preference shifted heavily towards smooth, rational, philosophical essays.
So they thought Bunyan was too gritty.
Yeah, his gritty, hyper-referential Puritan style felt archaic. It felt unrefined to polite 18th century sensibilities.
Wow.
So editors, quote-unquote, smoothed it out. They tried to make Bunyan sound like a polite Enlightenment philosopher.
And in doing so, they totally ruined the exegetical transparency of his work.
They really did. And it wasn't until an editor named George Offer came along in 1848, so over a century later, that things changed.
He meticulously restored every single reference.
Every single one.
Hmm.
So we finally got the original high-definition version back.
Which is amazing.
Yeah, and Offer's restoration proved that Bunyan was synthesizing scholastic theological precision with this incredible pastoral warmth.
Which is so key here. He wasn't writing this for Oxford dons to debate in a parlor.
Not at all.
He wrote it to break stony hearts, to warn the thoughtless, and above all, to comfort the dejected, doubting, and despairing Christian.
Which is a very specific target audience.
Yeah. So if you are listening to this deep dive right now, and you have ever stared at the ceiling at 3 a.m., wondering if you are entirely beyond hope.
If your failures have finally outpaced your potential.
Exactly. Bunyan wrote this for you.
And the foundational text he uses to reach that 3 a.m. listener is Ephesians chapter 3, verses 18 and 19.
Where Paul is praying for the Ephesian church.
Right. A group of believers facing severe affliction and persecution, very much like Bunyan himself.
So what does Paul pray for them?
He prays that they might be able to comprehend what is the breadth and length and depth and height of divine grace.
And to know the love of Christ, which passes knowledge.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Those 4 spatial words: breadth, length, depth, and height. It sounds poetic, sure.
Right, it's a beautiful metaphor.
It's like staring at the night sky. You'd look up, and the sheer scale of the Milky Way creates this wonderment.
A kind of spiritual surprise.
Yeah, a spiritual surprise that yanks your human heart away from your immediate worldly anxieties.
Right. You realize your mortgage payment or your workplace drama is incredibly small compared to the cosmos.
Exactly. But Bunyan insists we can't just stare at this concept in vague, mystical awe.
No, he uses a really visceral metaphor to combat that vague mysticism. He says these truths are like wheat in full ears.
Wheat in full ears. I mean, if you pluck a stalk of raw wheat and just chew on it, you're going to break your teeth.
Yeah, it doesn't feed you at all.
Right.
You have to actively rub it out in your hands. You have to thresh the grain.
So you have to put in the work.
Exactly. Bunyan argues that the threshing floor for this theology is diligent meditation. You have to intellectually and spiritually wrestle with these 4 dimensions before you can actually consume their comfort.
Okay, so let's hit the threshing floor. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because Bunyan doesn't treat breadth, length, depth, and height as mere rhetoric.
Not at all.
He treats them as an exact mathematical architecture. An architecture where the remedy is always mathematically and infinitely superior to the disease.
Right.
Let's start where Bunyan starts. The sheer, terrifying geography of human failure.
Which leads us to the first dimension, the breadth of grace.
Right.
To understand the breadth of grace, Bunyan first forces the reader to confront the breadth of sin.
Which is not a fun topic.
No, but he argues that human corruption isn't localized. It's not a bad habit you can just compartmentalize.
You can't put it in a little box in the corner of your mind.
Exactly. It's a spreading plague, much like leprosy in the ancient world.
Which wasn't just a skin condition. It was a creeping social and physical death sentence.
Yeah. He also compares it to a thick cloud that eventually covers the entire sky of the soul, just completely blocking out all light.
And he also brings in this intensely demonic imagery, right?
Oh, yeah. He describes Satan as a dogged leviathan,
A sea monster swimming through the mire of human corruption.
spreading sharp-pointed things to vex the conscience.
I find that imagery of the mire so potent. You're stuck in quicksand. You're sinking. And everywhere you frantically reach out to pull yourself up, you cut your hands on these hidden, sharp-pointed traps of guilt and temptation.
It creates a state of total paralysis.
Yeah, it does.
So if your disease spreads endlessly on a horizontal plane, infecting every motive and every action, what is the countermeasure?
Bunyan points to a grace that has a superabounding spreading breadth.
Right. He pulls this stunning visual from Ezekiel 16, verse 8.
This is the imagery of God finding an abandoned, bleeding infant in an open field. Right?
Yes. and spreading his skirt to cover its nakedness.
Wow, that is an intensely intimate metaphor for covenantal protection.
It really is. Bunyan's point is that no matter how far the leprosy of sin has spread across the human condition, no matter how vast the pollution, the breadth of divine grace is broader still.
It outflanks the disease.
Exactly. If the pollution covers 1,000 miles, the skirt of grace covers 1,001. It encompasses the entirety of the corruption.
It's the ultimate quarantine of human failure.
I like that phrasing, yeah.
But, sin doesn't just sit there and spread like a puddle. It has velocity.
It definitely has velocity, which is how Bunyan transitions to the second dimension, the length of grace.
Right, because sin operates like a centrifugal force.
Yes, it pushes the backslider away from the center. Bunyan likens it to a mighty tempest driving a ship helplessly before the wind.
Pushing the soul to the uttermost parts of heaven, or the belly of hell.
And he uses the prophet Jonah as the archetype here.
Jonah actively fleeing from the presence of God.
Boarding a ship to Tarshish, going down into the hold, going down into the sea, going down into the belly of the fish.
Terminal velocity away from grace.
Yes. So the problem here is extreme distance.
This is the listener who has completely wrecked their life, compromised their deepest morals, and run as fast and as far as possible in the opposite direction.
They are at the absolute edge of the map.
So what is the countermeasure for someone who has deliberately driven themselves to the uttermost parts?
The countermeasure is the long arm of God.
The long arm.
Yeah. Bunyan roots this in texts like Deuteronomy 30, verse 4, and Isaiah 59, verse 1.
Okay.
The promise is that even if you are driven out to the farthest reaches, God's arm is not shortened that it cannot save.
It is a pursuing mercy.
Exactly. It can reach out, grasp the wandering elect, and retrieve them from the absolute edge of oblivion.
Okay, I love the historical theology, but let me push back on how we actually apply this practically. Because if I'm listening to this right now, and I have a loved one, maybe a spouse who walked out, or a child battling severe addiction who hasn't called in 6 months.
They are in the uttermost parts.
Right. So how does knowing God has a quote-unquote long arm actually change the sheer panic a mother feels on a Tuesday morning? Does Bunyan just expect people to nod at the theology and feel better?
Well, Bunyan was a pastor. He knew perfectly well that theological trivia doesn't stop panic.
Good.
He uses this concept specifically to reform intercessory prayer.
How so?
When you have a loved one who seems utterly unreachable by human words, human interventions, or rehab facilities, your subjective anxiety tells you they are lost. The situation is hopeless.
Right. You feel like you can't reach them.
But Bunyan says you must appeal to the unsearchable length of God's arm. You pray, Lord, they have run beyond my physical reach, they have run beyond my emotional endurance, but they have not run beyond your mathematical jurisdiction.
Wow. Your arm has the length to retrieve them.
Yes. It takes the frantic energy of anxiety and anchors it to an objective, theological reality.
You are literally transferring the burden of reach from your short arms to God's infinite arm.
Exactly.
That is incredibly practical, and it transitions perfectly into the third dimension, which deals with a different kind of movement entirely.
Right, the depth of grace.
Because guilt doesn't always drive you horizontally away like Jonah. Sometimes it just drops you straight down through the floor.
This is arguably where Bunyan's psychological realism shines the brightest. He addresses what he calls sinking fits.
Sinking fits. I read that phrase and it stopped me in my tracks.
It's so descriptive.
He isn't talking about waking up on the wrong side of the bed. He is describing severe spiritual clinical depression.
Melancholy, as they would have termed it in the 17th century.
Right.
It's that claustrophobic feeling where a believer feels like the pit is literally shutting its mouth over them.
The water sloods overflow. They are drowning in their own guilt, their own inadequacy, their own intrusive thoughts.
And when you are in a sinking fit, God feels completely silent.
He feels entirely inactive. You look up, and the sky is just brass.
Yeah. So for that specific sinking reality, Bunyan points to a fascinating phrase from Jacob's blessing in Genesis 49.
The blessings of the deep that coucheth beneath.
Yes. Bunyan uses a heraldic metaphor here, mercy as a lion couchant.
A crouching lion.
Right. When you are in that deep depression, it might look like mercy is asleep. But a lion couchant isn't sleeping. It is coiled.
It is resting in a state of absolute readiness.
Exactly. Bunyan argues that no matter how deep the soul sinks into depression, fear, or spiritual darkness, The mercy of God lies deeper still.
It is waiting underneath you.
And at the exact right moment, it will awake and deliver the sinking soul. You literally cannot fall deeper than the floor of God's grace.
Wow. That reframes depression entirely.
It really does.
It means the bottom of your despair isn't an empty void. It is the coiled back of divine mercy.
Exactly.
And if the depth deals with sinking, the final dimension, the height of grace, deals with towering obstacles.
Right. Bunyan draws on historical biblical narratives here, like the Israelites facing giant adversaries called the Anakims.
Or Canaanite cities with walls supposedly built up to heaven.
Exactly. In the New Testament context, Paul calls this spiritual wickedness in high places.
It's the feeling of an impossible, unbridgeable gap. You look at the infinite holiness of God on one side, and you look at your own messy, compromised, deeply flawed biology on the other.
It's a wall that reaches the stratosphere.
So what's the countermeasure to that?
The countermeasure to that towering obstacle is Christ's transcendent sovereignty, which Bunyan visualizes through the imagery of Jacob's ladder from Genesis 28.
Jacob dreams of a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reaches to heaven.
Right, and Bunyan unpacks this as the hypostatic union.
Okay, let's unpack that. Hypostatic union is another theological term we need to decode.
Sure, it is the dual nature of Jesus Christ. Fully God, fully man, united in one person.
Okay.
Bunyan says Christ is the ladder. The foot of the ladder rests firmly on the dirt of the earth, representing his genuine humanity.
So, he experienced fatigue, betrayal, and physical pain. He is one of us.
Exactly. But the top of the ladder is in heaven, representing his eternal, uncreated deity.
He is the sole mechanism designed to bridge that impossible ontological gap between the creator and the creature.
Right.
But wait, a ladder implies that we still have to climb it. Is Bunyan saying, here is the bridge, now exert enough moral effort to pull yourself up to heaven?
No, not at all.
Because that sounds exhausting and, frankly, contradictory to the grace he just described.
That is the beauty of Bunyan's exegesis. You don't climb the ladder. The ladder descends to you.
Oh, I see.
The angels ascend and descend on it, meaning divine providence and intervention are flowing down to the believer across this bridge.
Christ's height guarantees that the lowest, most earthbound believer is firmly connected to the highest court of heaven.
Exactly.
So we've mapped out this massive four-dimensional architecture, a breadth that outflanks the spread of sin, a length that retrieves the runaway, a depth that catches the depressed, and a height that bridges the impossible gap.
It's mathematically perfect.
It is. But it forces a massive question. What kind of love can actually stretch to these mathematical proportions? Because if we look at our own human experience, human love certainly can't do this.
No, human love is incredibly fragile.
Bunyan recognizes this, which is why he makes a rigorous, necessary distinction between the mechanics of human passion and the ontology of divine love.
Right.
Break down that distinction for us. What does he mean by human love being a passion?
Well, in classical philosophy and Puritan theology, a passion is a movement of the soul triggered by an outside force.
It requires an external stimulus.
Exactly. It is inherently volatile. There has to be something pleasing, delightful, or valuable in the object of our affection. We love a person because they are funny or beautiful, or because they make us feel safe.
Right. And the terrifying corollary to that is the moment that object loses its beauty or betrays us or just severely gets on our nerves, the stimulus is gone.
The love decays.
It ebbs and flows based on the performance of the person being loved. Human love is reactive.
But divine love, Bunyan argues using 1 John 4:16, God is love, is an ontology.
It is essential to his very state of being.
Yes. Christ does not merely have love in his emotional repertoire. He is love. He would literally cease to be God if he ceased to love.
I think the best way to visualize this for the modern listener is the difference between a mirror and a projector.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Human love is a mirror. It only reflects back the beauty or value of whatever you place in front of it. Put something ugly or offensive in front of a mirror, and the mirror doesn't magically generate a beautiful image, it just reflects the ugliness.
Right.
But divine love is a projector. It acts entirely from itself. It beams its own brilliant image onto a blank or even a filthy screen. It doesn't love the elect because they are comely or beautiful. It loves them in order to make them comely.
That analogy perfectly encapsulates Bunyan's theology of unconditional election. Because Christ's love is a proactive, projecting force, it cannot be exhausted by the imperfections of the believer.
It never says, you aren't pretty enough or moral enough for me to love you anymore, because it never loved you for your prettiness or morality in the first place.
Exactly. Its source code is internal to God, not external in you.
And the staggering reality of this projector is highlighted by who this love is directed toward. You have the infinite creator of the universe setting his heart on creatures that Bunyan, in a very Puritan turn of phrase, literally describes as fleas.
Fleas, yes.
And not just fleas, but rebellious fleas. But there's a detail Bunyan points out about the hypostatic union Christ taking on human flesh that I found fascinating. He notes that Christ actually bypassed the fallen angels to save humanity.
Yes, drawing from the book of Hebrews. The angels were, by creation, a more noble nature. They excelled in strength, intellect, and spiritual capacity. They don't require sleep. They aren't bound by time in the same way we are.
Yet when a faction of angels fell into rebellion, there was no rescue mission authorized for them.
None. Christ bypassed the superior angelic realm to take hold of the inferior seed of Abraham.
This might sound like a strange question, but does this mean God intentionally chose the harder path? Because redeeming humans who were stuck in this mire of biological urges, fatigue, sickness, and bodily weakness seems vastly messier and more inefficient than redeeming purely spiritual beings.
Well, what's fascinating here is, from a purely functional standpoint, redeeming fallen angels might have been quote-unquote easier because they lack the specific corruptions and fleshly hindrances of humanity.
They don't have biological fatigue driving them to impatience or greed.
Exactly. But Christ chose the messier, more difficult path redeeming humanity out of the mud, specifically to display an even higher degree of this unsearchable love.
Because the lower the creature is on the ontological scale,
Yeah.
the greater the display of grace required to elevate them.
Yes, it is a demonstration of his own glory.
So if Christ's love is this active, unstoppable ontological force that deliberately chose the hardest possible rescue mission, how did it actually execute the rescue? We're talking about cosmic math, but how did it happen in history? This brings us to the mechanics of the atonement and what Bunyan calls the improvements of death.
To understand the execution of the rescue mission, you have to understand Bunyan's precise view of penal substitution. He systematically presents Christ as the common person.
Common person sounds like an insult today, like someone who lacks manners.
Right, but in 17th century legal terms, it means a federal head or a legal representative.
Like an ambassador whose signature binds an entire nation.
Exactly. Christ stands in the exact stead, place, and room of the elect. He doesn't just sympathize with them, he legally becomes them in the eyes of divine justice.
So when the Lord laid upon him the iniquities of his people, divine justice demanded that Christ undergo the exact proper wages of that sin.
And this leads us straight into a massive theological controversy that Bunyan had to address, a debate that is honestly still raging in theological circles today.
The descended ad inferos. It's a Latin phrase in the Apostles' Creed that states, Christ descended into hell. Why did people want Jesus to literally go to hell? Was it seen as some kind of epic rescue mission?
Yes. Historically, there were vastly different interpretations of this phrase. Some ancient theological traditions, and even some in Bunyan's day, believed in a literal spatial descent.
Like he physically traveled there.
Right. They thought that between Friday afternoon and Sunday morning, while his body was in the tomb, Christ's spirit literally traveled to a geographic underworld.
To do what?
Well, some thought he went to liberate Old Testament saints from a holding area called limbo. Others believed he went down to preach a message of absolute victory and doom to imprisoned demonic spirits.
It's often called the harrowing of hell. It sounds incredibly cinematic.
It does. But Bunyan completely rejected that literal underworld tour.
Entirely. He took a strictly penal, legal approach.
Right. He argued that the pains of hell were not experienced in some subterranean cave on Holy Saturday. They were endured directly on the wooden cross on Good Friday.
Bunyan's argument is that the true nature of hell isn't a physical location with fire and brimstone. The essence of hell is the experience of bearing the unmitigated, unshielded wrath of God.
Exactly. So when Christ is in the Garden of Gethsemane, sweating drops of blood under extreme psychological terror.
Or when the sky goes dark on the cross and he cries out in total dereliction, my God, why have you forsaken me?"
Bunyan is saying that was hell.
Wow.
He was put into the exact legal and spiritual capacity of a damned soul suffering what absolute justice demands. He experienced the infinite weight of eternal separation compressed into those finite hours on the cross.
And Bunyan is fierce about this pushback, isn't he?
Oh, very fierce.
He goes after theologians who try to pare away the infinite sufferings of the cross to protect Jesus from what he calls the odious names of hell.
It's as if polite society wanted to sanitize the crucifixion.
They wanted a tidy, noble martyrdom.
Right. But Bunyan's point is mathematically devastating. If you diminish the horror of what he went through, you diminish the scale of the love that drove him to do it.
If he didn't suffer the equivalent of hell on the cross, then his love didn't actually reach the ultimate depth of the human problem.
Exactly. And because Christ died and rose as that legal common person, as our ambassador, everything that legally befell him now legally befalls the believer.
Which brings us to the improvements of the atonement.
Right. Bunyan calls these the improvements. Think of them as the ripple effects or the massive dividends paid out to the believer's account.
He lists 6 specific federal improvements that change the reality of the listener's everyday life. Let's weave through these because this is the payload of the theology.
Definitely. Improvement number 1 is objective justification.
Okay, what does that mean practically?
Because the elect were legally united to Christ in his death, his resurrection on Sunday morning was the public cosmic declaration that the debt was fully paid.
Right. A judge doesn't release a prisoner if the fine hasn't been cleared.
Exactly. Therefore, the believer's justification, their right standing before God, isn't based on a subjective feeling of holiness on a Tuesday morning.
It was objectively, historically secured the moment Christ walked out of the tomb in the 1st century.
Your feelings of guilt do not change the historical fact of the empty tomb.
That is so freeing. And that leads to the second improvement, the abolition of death.
Yes.
Now, to a skeptic, that sounds like a blatant overstatement. People still biologically die? Christians still die of cancer and old age? How is death abolished?
People still biologically expire, yes. But Bunyan's point is that the fundamental nature of death has been altered.
Altered how?
The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. Because Christ exhausted the penal curse of the law, death is no longer a punishment for the believer.
The stinger has been removed.
Exactly. A bee without a stinger can buzz around and terrify you, but it cannot venomously kill you.
So Bunyan describes biological death now as merely a pleasant sleep in a transport mechanism.
Right. It's the door opening to take the soul to life.
The third improvement is the procurement of the Holy Ghost. This is an interesting mechanical insight into how grace is distributed.
It's a profound pneumatic insight. Bunyan notes that the Holy Spirit was first poured out immeasurably upon Christ's human nature.
Christ was the first fruits.
Exactly. The Spirit was given to the head of the body so that it could then logically and organically flow down to the rest of the body, meaning the church.
So the presence of the Spirit in your life today is a direct result of Christ securing it in his human nature first.
Yes.
The fourth improvement is universal lordship. Bunyan says Christ holds the metheg amma.
The bridle of control. As a reward for his obedience, Christ is now the High Lord of heaven and earth.
He holds the reins over all kings, all political nations, all global events, and all fallen angels.
He wields all of human history for the ultimate benefit and gathering of his church.
Which brings us to the fifth improvement, the provision of ministry. And I have to say, I love this point.
Oh, I know why you love it.
Mostly because Bunyan manages to sneak in a very sharp, subtle diss track against the religious establishment that locked him in prison.
He certainly does. He notes that Christ, having ascended, obtained spiritual gifts to supply his church with genuine pastors and teachers.
And he uses this to polemicize against the state-appointed, unregenerate clergy of the Church of England.
The very men who told Bunyan he wasn't authorized to preach.
Bunyan says these men relied on uncouth expressions and dry academic jargon rather than the actual illuminating power of the Holy Ghost.
Your expressions are uncouth and you have no spirit.
It's the ultimate 17th century intellectual burn. He's telling his readers, don't listen to the guys with the fancy robes who put me in here. They don't actually know the architect.
It's brilliant. And finally, the sixth improvement, the possession of heaven.
Right. Christ enters heaven as the forerunner.
He isn't just up there waiting passively. He is taking legal possession of the eternal inheritance on behalf of his people.
He is securing the deed to the house in our name so that our future glorification is an absolute legal certainty. So we have mapped out the 4 dimensions of the architecture. We've looked at the ontology of a projecting unconditional love.
We've detailed the gritty legal mechanics of the atonement and the dividends it pays.
But we have to go back to the epistemological riddle we started with.
Right, because Bunyan insists that this love passes knowledge.
If we just listed all these exact legal and mathematical mechanics, how is it beyond calculation? Have we not just comprehended it?
Well, Bunyan resolves this paradox by differentiating between comparative knowledge and absolute comprehension.
Explain that difference for us.
We can know the nature of the love. We know it is free, divine, and unconditional. And we can experience the degrees of it in our daily lives. We feel its comfort. We see its providence.
That is comparative knowledge.
Yes, but we can never achieve absolute comprehension, meaning we can never fully wrap our minds around the total volume of it because we constantly run into four divine impossibilities.
Four mathematical walls. What are the walls?
First, this love has no beginning. It existed before the foundation of the world, before we had any created being.
The human brain cannot fathom the eternal, pre-timed counsels of the Trinity.
Right. Second, it has no end. Eternity has no conclusion. Bunyan says we will spend forever in heaven experiencing and exploring this love without ever reaching its land's end.
It's an infinitely expanding universe of grace.
Yes. Third, it is intrinsically infinite because it originates in the infinite essence of God. It is mathematically impossible for a finite vessel, a human mind, to contain an infinite ocean.
That makes total sense.
And fourth, it is simply incomprehensible due to the sheer disparity between the majesty of the Creator and the lowliness of the creature.
But Bunyan doesn't just say God is too big to understand. He flips it.
He does.
He says it's not just about God's size, it's about our blindness. We can't calculate the scale of the love because we literally cannot calculate the math of our own sin.
He says that sin, in its absolute essence, seeks to annihilate God.
That is a terrifying phrase, annihilate God.
It is terrifying, and it requires some explanation. Because we do not comprehend the infinite purity and holiness of God, we fundamentally do not comprehend the infinite evil of rebelling against him.
We think of sin as a minor mistake or a character flaw.
Bunyan says no. Every sin is an act of cosmic treason that, if it had the power, would pull God off his throne. Furthermore, Bunyan talks about the aggravations of sin.
Aggravations meaning things that make the sin worse.
Yes. We don't just sin in a vacuum. We sin against the light of nature, against the knowledge of the Bible, against the daily experiences of God's patience, against our own personal vows we made during our last crisis.
So every time we sin against better knowledge, the guilt is mathematically multiplied. It is aggravated.
He also talks about the tendencies of sin.
Right. The idea that even the tiniest, least offensive sin you commit in the privacy of your own mind intrinsically deserves hell.
And inherently acts like a weight seeking to drag others down into the deep with you.
Because we are utterly blind to the secret microscopic pollution in our own hearts, we constantly underestimate how much grace is actually required just to keep us afloat for a single hour.
And if we are blind to our internal pollution, we are equally blind to the external satanic wiles surrounding us.
Yeah, Bunyan notes that the devil engages in continuous unseen plottings.
He makes legal appeals in the heavenly court against us, demanding our destruction, much like he did with Job. He lays invisible traps in our daily routines.
I think this is profound. Because we don't have spiritual night vision goggles, we don't see the trap.
Right.
Which means we don't see the moment-by-moment interventions of Christ's love saving us from stepping in it.
No idea.
We walk through a spiritual minefield completely blindfolded, make it to the other side of the week and think, wow, I'm a really good walker. I managed my time well.
Yeah.
We have no idea that divine love was actively diffusing bombs inches from our feet all day long.
Precisely. And this total inability to calculate the unseen danger means we have a total built-in inability to calculate the volume of the love that protects us.
It passes our knowledge because it is operating on a frequency we cannot even perceive.
Exactly.
Okay, so this is incredibly dense, majestic theology, but I want to ground this for the listener again.
Sure.
How does this massive epistemological framework offer pastoral care? When someone is in the middle of a sinking fit, when their life is falling apart, how does understanding the four impossibilities of grace actually help them survive the day?
Well, it offers survival through a radical reframing of suffering. We might call it a hermeneutic of providence.
A way of interpreting why bad things are happening to you.
Yes, and Bunyan illustrates this by pulling a somewhat bizarre story from Genesis chapter 48, where the patriarch Jacob is blessing his two grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh.
Set the scene up for us because the psychological insight here is brilliant.
So Joseph brings his two sons to his elderly blind father, Jacob, to receive the patriarchal blessing. Manasseh is the older son, so by all cultural and legal rights, he should get the right hand.
The primary blessing of power and favor.
Right. Ephraim is the younger, so he should get the left hand. Joseph lines them up perfectly, but Jacob intentionally crosses his hands, placing his right hand on the younger son, Ephraim.
Joseph actually gets upset and tries to fix his dad's hands, thinking the blind old man made a mistake. But Jacob says, I know what I'm doing. Why does Bunyan use this specific moment?
Bunyan looks at the etymology of the boys' names. Manasseh literally means to forget all toil.
It represents exactly what our human nature desires: health, wealth, ease, friction-free life, the absence of suffering.
Every single one of us wants God's right hand of blessing to rest on Manasseh.
But Ephraim means fruitful in the land of affliction.
Right. By crossing his hands, God is intentionally placing the primary spiritual blessing on the condition of affliction and sorrow.
Because sorrow is a better tutor than laughter. We learn more about the depth of grace in the dark than we ever do in the light.
The pastoral insight Bunyan is driving at is this. When you are suffering, when you are in a season of deep deprivation, you must not interpret your earthly sorrow as a withdrawal of divine love.
The crossed hands of providence mean that this specific affliction is the very mechanism, the very threshing floor God is using to break open the riches of his goodness to you.
Yes.
But what happens in the affliction isn't just circumstantial. What happens when you lose your job or you get a terrible diagnosis, and it is immediately followed by a severe internal spiritual attack. Because Bunyan paints this incredibly vivid picture of Satan acting as a prosecuting attorney in the courtroom of your own mind.
He calls them the devil's interrogatories.
I want the listener to picture this. The devil corners your conscience in the dark, and he doesn't use lies. He uses devastatingly accurate questions.
Right.
Dost thou not know that thou hast horribly sinned? Art thou not a graceless wretch? Is not your heart filled with pride and unbelief?
And the terrifying part of this interrogation is that the honest believer looks at the evidence and has to answer, yes, I am guilty.
And the moment you admit guilt, Satan drops the hammer and says, therefore you are beyond hope. Despair and go hang thyself.
It is the ultimate crisis of faith. How do you defend yourself in the court of your own conscience when the prosecuting attorney's accusations are entirely factually true?
And Bunyan's script for this defense is pure genius. He says, you don't.
You do not use subjective self-defense. You don't argue with the devil by saying, well, I'm not that bad, or I read my Bible yesterday, or I gave to charity last week.
Because your subjective goodness is flimsy. It will always collapse under the absolute weight of the law's demands. If you try to stand on your own record, the prosecutor will destroy you.
Instead, Bunyan says you use Ephesians 3:20 as your ultimate impregnable reserve.
You appeal directly to the objective mathematical infinity of Christ's love. You look at the prosecuting attorney, you look at your own ruined record, and you say, Satan, though I cannot think that God loves me right now, and though I am entirely guilty of everything you just said, God can do abundantly above what I ask or think.
You take the incomprehensibility of that love, the fact that it mathematically passes all human knowledge, and you use it as a psychological fortress.
The devil says your sin is a towering mountain, and you say, my Savior's grace is the stratosphere. You can't outmath God.
It is a stunning reversal. Bunyan weaponizes the incomprehensibility of God against the accusations of the devil.
You essentially concede the battle over your own righteousness in order to win the war by sheltering in Christ's infinite righteousness.
It is brilliant, durable pastoral care for the worst moments of human existence.
It really is. And having that kind of fortress-level security should radically change the trajectory of how a person actually walks through their daily life.
Which brings us to the final major theme of the deep dive: practical living.
Right. How does a person who knows they are loved with an unsearchable mathematical certainty actually live on a Wednesday afternoon?
Well, Bunyan contrasts two distinct types of believers here to illustrate the practical difference. First, you have the pinioned Christian.
To be pinioned means to have your arms tied down or your wings clipped.
Yes, this is the anxious, legalistic Christian. They are genuinely saved, but they live from hand to mouth in constant spiritual anxiety.
They are terrified of making a mistake. They view God as a harsh taskmaster who is constantly auditing their behavior.
Their spiritual life is cramped and fearful.
And the contrast to that pinioned existence is the believer who possesses a godly largeness of heart.
Bunyan compares this to the biblical well of Rehoboth from Genesis 26.
Isaac dug several wells that the Philistines fought him over, which he named for strife and enmity, but finally he dug a well they didn't fight over.
And he named it Rehoboth, which means broad places or room. Bunyan uses Rehoboth to describe the internal geography of a believer who truly grasps the dimensions of grace. It's a vast, open space where the soul can turn every way without feeling straitened, trapped, or condemned.
This person walks through life not as a cowering servant, but as a spiritual prince, entirely free and unbothered by the petty accusations of the enemy.
But Bunyan is a Puritan, so this liberty isn't cheap, and it certainly isn't lawless. He offers rigorous rules for maintaining this Rehoboth liberty.
He provides a deeply psychological framework for it.
The first rule for walking in liberty is, paradoxically, radical self-knowledge regarding your own sin. You must continually use the moral law as a glass, a mirror, to perceive the absolute depths of your own wretchedness.
Wait, if the goal is to feel free and happy, why is step one, stare at how wretched you are? That seems counterproductive.
Because of the principle of contrast, you cannot possibly appreciate the staggering magnitude of the cure until you recognize the total, fatal reality of the disease.
If you think you only have a mild spiritual cold, the unsearchable dimensions of grace will seem like overkill.
You will never marvel at the breadth and length of the remedy until the law shows you the true breadth and length of your depravity.
Which leads directly to rule 2, repudiating self-righteousness.
Yes.
It is recognizing that even our absolute best deeds, our charity, our deepest prayers, our moments of profound empathy, are fundamentally polluted with mixed motives, secret pride, and vain glory. We bring absolutely nothing pure to the negotiating table.
And Rule 3, which is the crux of Protestant experiential theology, separating the law and the gospel.
Right. Bunyan insists there must be an everlasting, unbridgeable distance between the two in the mind of the believer.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the law is permitted to rule the outward man. It maintains ethical decorum in society. It guides our behavior and interactions.
But the gospel alone must rule the internal conscience.
Yes, because if you let the demands of the law sneak into the throne room of your conscience, it breeds instant catastrophic despair.
The law demands a perfection you cannot supply. It will constantly scream, "You haven't done enough."
Exactly. The conscience must be the exclusive, fiercely guarded territory of grace. When the law knocks on the door of the conscience demanding payment, the believer must point to the cross and say, "The debt is settled. Talk to my representative."
But as soon as you talk about extreme, unconditional debt-canceling grace, you run headfirst into a massive theological and practical danger, the danger of antinomianism.
Antinomianism literally means anti-law. It is the abuse of grace.
Right.
Writing during the cultural whiplash of the Restoration, Bunyan saw plenty of people, even within the church, using the concept of free grace to justify widespread debauchery.
Their logic was, if my sin highlights God's grace and the debt is already paid, then I can live however I want.
Bunyan addresses this with terrifying severity. He calls it using grace as a stalking horse for sin.
A stalking horse was a decoy that hunters would hide behind so they could creep up and shoot their target.
Yes. Bunyan says that hiding behind the breathtaking reality of Christ's love so you can take shots at his commandments places a hypocrite in proximity to the rebellion of devils.
It takes the most sacred, costly thing in the universe and weaponizes it for fleshly pleasure. It is the most inexcusable of sins.
Because true grace does not produce careless, lawless living. Bunyan argues that when you truly apprehend the mathematical dimensions of this love, it graciously constrains the believer. It alters your desires.
When you realize the infinite cost of your rescue, it demands a radical, joyful reorientation of your affections.
There is a specific quote from the treatise that sums this up perfectly, and it is devastatingly beautiful. Bunyan writes, "His love stripped him of all for my sake. Lord, let my love strip me of all for thy sake."
Wow. That isn't the voice of legalism. That is the voice of overwhelming gratitude.
It is the inevitable organic fruit of truly experiencing the theology we've been discussing.
Which leads us to the ultimate conclusion of Bunyan's treatise, the eschatological consummation. Eschatology being the theology of the end times, or ultimate destinies. Bunyan argues that if you really truly understand this love, even just the comparative degrees of it we can grasp here, it essentially ruins you for this world, in a good way.
It creates a holy weariness. You realize that you cannot fully experience the unsearchable depths of this grace while you are trapped in this biology and this timeline with a brain that can only process finite concepts.
The prospect of the day of judgment is entirely transformed by this framework.
For the natural man, the day of judgment is a day of unspeakable terror. It is a cosmic courtroom of exposure.
But for the believer who is legally wrapped in the federal headship of Christ, who is sheltered in the four dimensions of this grace, Judgment Day is no longer a courtroom.
Bunyan describes it as the anticipated moment of a public marriage.
It is the moment where the painful limitations of earthly knowledge are finally swallowed up in perfect eternal communion.
It's the moment the wheat is finally fully rubbed out and the eternal feast actually begins.
The epistemological paradox is resolved not by our brains getting bigger, but by our reality being transformed.
Yeah.
We will know as we are known.
Beautifully put.
Let's bring all this together for you, the listener. We started in a freezing, damp prison cell with an epistemological riddle: how to obey a command to know a love that explicitly passes knowledge.
And we've seen how Bunyan, through sheer theological genius and deep pastoral empathy, mapped out the unsearchable dimensions of grace.
A breadth to cover the expanding plague of our sin. A length to retrieve us from the absolute furthest edge of our rebellion.
A depth to catch us when we fall into the darkest, most claustrophobic pits of clinical and spiritual depression.
And at a height that bridges the impossible gap between our ruined humanity and the infinite holiness of God.
He framed divine love not as a fleeting, reactive human emotion that depends on our daily performance, but as an unstoppable ontological reality.
A projector beaming grace onto the unlovely.
A love that bypassed the superior nature of angels to deliberately redeem the very creatures who were rebelling against it.
And in doing so, he provided an impregnable mathematical fortress for the desponding conscience to hide in when the prosecuting attorney comes knocking in the middle of the night.
John Bunyan wove together rigorous 440-verse exegesis with the deep psychological empathy of a man who suffered immensely.
To prove that the absolute apex of human knowledge is a humble, joyful surrender to an infinite mystery.
Absolutely.
As you go about the rest of your day, whether you are driving to work, washing the dishes, or trying to silence the anxieties in your own mind, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Something to really think about.
If Christ's love is an unchangeable ontological reality that acts purely from itself, and if our eternity will be spent exploring a love that has no land's end, how does that completely redefine the way you measure your own worth today?
That's a huge question.
Think about the metrics you use to judge yourself. If you stripped away every single accomplishment you've ever achieved, every resume bullet point, every moment of praise you've ever received. Wait, let me rephrase that. Every moment of praise you've ever received. And if you also laid bare every catastrophic failure, every secret shame, every vow you've broken in the dark, the mathematical equation of this grace remains exactly, immutably the same.
It does not fluctuate with your performance.
What would your life look like tomorrow if you actually believed that?